Well, what's up, gamers? DreamcastGuy here. Video games as an art form are very unique because they're kind of controversial at times. They try and express viewpoints that aren't exactly normal, and definitely, we are the main characters. Sometimes it's us who are doing the acts that are just so scary or terrifying or offensive. So today, we're going to actually be digging deep to try and find some of the most offensive and crazy things ever released on my picks of the top 10 most controversial games.
Number 10. GTA 5. Whenever you're talking about game series that are pushing things to the extreme and constantly trying to do things bigger and crazier, there's nobody that's better at this than, of course, Grand Theft Auto. Each of these games is so heavily talked about, but the discussion, especially from journalists when it came to GTA 5, was mostly centered on a torture scene. At one point, you actually capture a gentleman and have to do some pretty bad things to him, things that are so offensive that a lot of people were actually trying to get this removed. Not just from store shelves, they were actually telling the game developers to patch this entire section of the game out of existence, which kind of makes it something that is pretty hotly talked about even among this world. Number 9. Mortal Kombat. The late 80s and early 90s was kind of the renaissance of gaming. It's when people were trying to do the most stuff to really kind of just get some sales. Whatever could actually get some eyeballs in your product was probably a good thing. And that's why when Mortal Kombat came out, it was definitely a very good fighting game, but a lot of people were kind of just shocked by seeing on-screen gore, watching people get their spines ripped out and heads punched off and people being frozen or exploded. I mean, there really hadn't been a game doing that in such graphical realism, and the government themselves actually took notice. This game was considered to be so gory and so insane, it actually led to the creation of the ESRB. It led to ratings board as we know them now. Number 8. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. In pretty much any game that comes out, we play as the good guys, the heroes, the people who swoop in and save the day. But this isn't always the case. Sometimes we get to do particular missions as the enemy, or as some people pretending to be the enemy. And that's actually what happened in this. The mission itself was called No Russian, and pretty much anybody who was playing a lot of games during the early 2000s definitely knows about this. It was a very big deal. Basically, we were playing as a secret agent who is infiltrated a bunch of terrorists and goes into an airport and hurts a lot of very innocent people. It was something that had a lot of people talking because if we're going to really address video games as an art form, we have to look at the criticisms. And I'm somebody that actually thought that the mission itself served a purpose. It made the bad guys seem more evil, it made the good guys seem more desperate, and honestly, I do think that it helped the story, even if it did manage to kind of piss some people off. Number 7. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Before you get a chance to start laughing, this really was considered to be one of the most offensive games on the planet at one point. In fact, this was banned in pretty much every single store worldwide. What you're looking at is an Atari 2600 game that a lot of people, especially historians and stuff, consider to be one of the most blatantly violent games. The whole point of it is to actually play as Leatherface, the bad guy of the movie, and hunt people down. And while this is incredibly pixelated and super goofy, the characters we kill actually scream in like 8-bit. They go, "Wah!" And it's funny, but that also managed to just make a lot of people very, very offended. It was pulled from pretty much every place it existed, and it was one of the first real controversies that had people asking, what point is video games across the line? South Park, The Stick of Truth. South Park, The Stick of Truth. For this entry, we need to really think about a question to start with, which is, when does a joke go too far? I mean, for most of us, there is nothing across the line. We'll pretty much laugh at anything as long as it's a well-formed and actually silly joke. Well, some people actually thought that South Park: The Stick of Truth went way across the boundaries when it included a ton of very raunchy humor. Fart jokes, diarrhea, people actually shooting farts like Kamehamehas, but more specifically, there is actually an extended anal probe scene when aliens come down. Now to me, this was hilarious. I'll admit it, I was cracking up when I played this game. But certain places in the world, well, their sensibilities are a little bit different. This actually had to be fully centered in certain sections of the world. People were actually never allowed to see these scenes unless they went to YouTube to actually watch them, which to me is kinda ridiculous, but hey, I guess that's kind of the nature of gaming. Number 5. Doom. It's strange sometimes to take a look at the past and see what was considered extreme during that time period, what was considered too far back then. And when it comes to something like that, Doom is definitely something that when it came out was a craze. People were actually afraid of even playing it. There were all sorts of rumors of kids going insane or doing very dangerous acts in real life because of the digital violence. Now part of this is because for some reason a lot of religious people were very taken aback by the demons in this game. The fact that you actually go to hell and rip apart these evil creatures, to them was extremely too far. And it's funny now because now the graphics, they're not a big deal. The gore, it's kind of laughable. But during the time period, this was considered so dangerous, parents all across the world were actually banning children from even looking at screenshots. Number 4. Borderlands 3. When it comes to video game controversies, they're typically centered on a particular aspect of the product. It's people being offended about some sort of depiction or the gameplay or the microtransactions. But what I've always found very fascinating about Borderlands 3 is that even though this is recent, we've had pretty much an entire year of controversy surrounding it, from things like the director of the game, Randy Pitchford, leaving a weird thumb drive full of some very questionable content at a restaurant and almost leaking files of Borderlands 3 really early. One of the voice actors, the guy who does the voice of Claptrap, well, he wasn't in this game because he says that he was physically beat up by Randy Pitchford. There's even things like there was all sorts of confusion as to whether or not there would or would not be some sort of purchasable cosmetic microtransactions and loot crates. There was so much about this, and additionally, a lot of people were actually boycotting it because they were trying to sell out. That's what everybody kept saying. Borderlands 3 was only going to be on the Epic Game Store. Pretty much anytime this game was mentioned, there was a very heated topic as to whether or not it was even a good act to purchase a game like this, or if it's more ethical to pirate. To me, this will definitely go down in the history books as one of the games that I think is the most talked about when it comes to negative press ever made. Number 3. Night Trap. Hey boys, you've just been invited to the very best of the Night Trap sleepover experience. You're going to be cuddling up with you and your gal pals, playing games, doing a makeover, and hopefully not getting captured by the evil baddies. Yes, this really is the premise of Night Trap. This was during a weird time where people were experimenting with the idea of putting actual movies inside of a video game. They called it full motion video, and it didn't really work out. Basically, the premise is that by pressing different buttons on your controller, you could switch to different camera angles, and you had to try and stop the bad guys before they'd kill any of the girls. And honestly, the depictions of violence in this game are pretty tame. There's nothing in this that's like bloody or gory or crazy, but people were super sensitive about this. There was a huge public outcry about the idea of a game that had real women sort of looking like they're being captured and drug off screen. And so, for whatever reason, people flipped out. This was actually getting banned pretty much everywhere for a short time, and it's funny to me because it's just so fake. I mean, the fact that anybody actually looked at like a screenshot or any of this gameplay and was like, oh my gosh, how dare they? To me, that is just hilarious. Number 2. Hatred. Throughout the course of this Top 10 Thursday, I'm sure you've caught on that it seems like the biggest thing that people kind of think is across the line is violence. It seems like that in particular is what people certainly fixate on the most, and it's why I kind of understand the backlash and outcry that happened because of hatred. Now, in most video games, you're killing the bad guys, or if you're a good guy, you're fighting people like the cops. I mean, normally, you're fighting against people who can actually fight back. Hatred was different because you're kinda killing everybody. You're walking down the street, you're doing some pretty heinous acts, and so because of it, a lot of people were actually really trying to petition Steam to have it removed from the storefront, and for a short time, it actually happened. In my opinion, this is one of the earliest examples of Steam, and Valve in particular, having to step in a personal manner. They were actually trying to stop something that was in a little bit to the gray area. Now, personally, I played Hatred back in the day, and I didn't really care for it. It was certainly one of those shock value projects, and now I still don't think it was worth banning just because it is so ridiculous. Number 1. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Well, it seems we began this video by talking about Grand Theft Auto, and we're going to end it by talking about Grand Theft Auto. Now, many of you know the story, but I want to tell it anyways because it is just so funny. Basically, in the original code of Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, there was going to be an additional little mini-game called Hot Coffee. Basically, if you were going on a date and you made a girl happy enough, she could possibly take you back up to her house and, you know, do the hanky-panky. But what's funny is that they managed to partially remove this from the finalized game. They basically took out a lot of the code that would make it where you could actually do this event. You could still go on dates, you could make girls happy, but they couldn't actually do the hot coffee portion until a bunch of data miners discovered it and actually patched it back in. If you purchased GTA San Andreas on PC, you could actually install this and easily go back and do this cut content. And so once this started spreading across the internet, people were freaking out. This was an actual game on actual store shelves that had a button that was like, press X to slam it in harder. I mean, what the heck? This is just so funny to me, but it seems like others weren't so tickled by the experience. This actually led to a huge lawsuit. They lost millions and millions of dollars basically in fighting this in court and even having to actually physically remove every single copy from store shelves and reprint every disc without that code intact. It's pretty crazy, but hey, now it's just another page in gaming history.
Did your favorite game not make the list? Got an idea for a future top 10? Leave it in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this cat, please give it a thumbs up, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. Hey, I just want to thank you guys for watching a bunch of the content lately, but also to DreamcastGuy. She's been doing a bunch of different stuff for me behind the scenes. We are going to be at BlizzCon together coming up. That is the beginning of November? End of October, right?
Yes.
Yes. So we're going to be there. She's going to be in crazy cosplay. Here's her Instagram. If you want to come and find us and meet us, we're definitely going to be there. So hope to see you there, and we'll talk about more controversial stuff.
Hey, hello. Hello, everybody. A famous cat. Fuck you, DreamcastGuy.
Oh, Jesus. Oh, jeez, please. Loki, spare me.
Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, you know, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.